The Dragon Lord's Consort, Chapter 8. The Betrayal of the Consort. It was so unusual to see a dragon as young as Spike bury his snout into the scroll before him. The scrolls that he could translate, which he said was proper Equish, Ember said was simply known as the Ancient Common, something that he was attested to with his first encounter with the Night Princess. Still, it made an interesting read for him as he translated most of the scrolls in seconds. Vast histories of dragons and dragon civilization expanded thousands of years before Ponydom started. The first council of dragons, the first dragon lords, the first written words that predate any known sources still in pony kind. It wasn't the full history of dragons, for those were the scrolls he could not really translate, but gave him something to look forward to, sharing with Twilight in his return. Ember, meanwhile, was more impressed about the young Drake. Seeing him absorb knowledge or read in such a way most dragons take years to learn, it was impressive. Young dragons don't like to read nor learn about boring stuff that they had nothing to do with them until they are at a certain age. The dragons that read these scrolls are dragons that prepare to be dragon lords, elders, historians, or just dragons seeking to become smarter than your average drake. This was a rare thing to see around here, since most dragons are somewhat disdained against any other dragon that tries to be smarter than regular dragons. Most dragons think that knowledge is a waste of one's time to do rather than pillaging villages, gaining hordes, seeking a mate or mates, or even just finding a new home outside the dragon lands. Those that do seek knowledge often leave the lands to seek more knowledge where they won't be shunned or neglected. She often wondered where those intellectual dragons wind up. One thing he asked was how the scrolls were still intact after millenniums of use with very little wear and tear from the ages. Some dragons have bendable hide or scales that, once they're shed off, they can be smoothed out or even enhanced with some dragon flame to be used as a scroll. He was immediately disturbed by the fact that he was holding dead dragon scales, but Ember quickly assured him. Yes, it is that, but it's because of our scales that they can be used to hold information. Some of these scrolls are literally just scales and skins that hold each dragon's unique chemistry. Despite them being dead scales, they could last for centuries, and which point have to be re-enhanced with dragonfire or through other magical means. He nodded in understanding before focusing back on his scrolls. He did send a few words and parts of Dragonlord to Twilight via instant messaging. He could practically hear the squeals through the thank you notes she was replying with. Spike sighed as he finished the last scroll before rolling it up and setting it aside. That was the last one, and despite the deep and colorful meanings to dragon history, it was still daunting to know that there was way more to it than just these few scrolls. Ember had shown him a whole wall full of these scrolls, and he only just touched a few that he could grab. Who knows how much ancient history of Dragonlore waited to be told or read? He knew that if he were to show Twilight these, she would be bouncing with glee at the thought of being the first non-dragon to read these since pony civilization even began. Well, that is the last one, and I feel like that really wasn't enough to satisfy me in all the dragon lore. He sounded a bit dejected at that, and Ember really couldn't blame him. I know that learning another language may take time, but you have plenty of that since you are a dragon after all. Whether it takes you 100 years or 1,000, you can learn as much as you want. That did get a nod out of him, though the thought of living for 1,000 years seemed almost incomprehensible. To see many lives pass and go with a saddening thought, and he knew it would take time to adjust to that, but it somewhat intrigued him to what the future would hold as he saw the time fly by in him in a way where he could live through history and maybe, just maybe, get a chance to write it. One day, 100 years from now, he could end up seeing dragons, ponies, and all sorts of other creatures living in harmony, playing, laughing, existing, together, in a glorious future that seemed all too grand. Just like he promised his friends and family that when he would return, he would try and help and unite ponies and dragons into a better future and a better world. After all the scrolls were set back into place, or in their proper holdings, Ember showed him a bit more around the area. The Hoard was just where they could have his lunch or snack wherever he needed. Ember allowed him as much as he wanted from the Hoard so long as he didn't really overdo it and allowed his greed to consume him. He made sure that he would only take maybe one or two. Next, Ember showed him the fountain where at the center, a small nozzle turned and expelled fresh river water. As much as he was comforted by the lives of ponies, he was no stranger to doing a few things here and there, and the old school as well. It would pool into a larger tub where either he could drink from or in this case he could bathe in. However, this is where Ember showed him the true bathing area, and that was the pool of lava that was near the center of the room. It wasn't massive, but he felt like he could swim around it and gain some joy out of it. Just being near it filled his nose with sulfur and brimstone, through a hint of charred rocks that also lingered. He noticed, however, that the stones of the tub holding the lava was onyx black, but not of a stone he was familiar with. Lastly came the highlight of the room, and that was Ember's giant mountain of pillows. It came to no surprise that they were either pony or griffin-made pillows that automatically begged the question, "Where did the pillows come from?" he asked out loud. Ember was a bit flushed, but she decided to remain truthful to her consort, at least for now. "Those came from the ponies or griffins." He gave her a skeptical look, and he was open to speak more, but she quickly cut him off. "They were my pillows before I was born, so father had taken them long before you and I came to our mutual understanding," she finished off. He didn't remark after that. He did, however, catch a unique scent coming from the area. It was so odd that as he approached the pillows, it became stronger. His head began to swim a bit, almost like a nice comforting lightheadedness, and he was filled with wonder to what it held. Much to Ember's horror, she quickly realized that Spike was approaching her pillows, and she instantly knew that, in Spike's hazy and staring state, that he was catching a whiff of her early sessions this week with her preheat lingering scents of her fluids that were drenched into her pillows. She never cleaned them and have blended in with the pillows and stained her essences. She quickly grabbed the Drake, startling him out of his daze. "What?" he cried out as he quickly was pulled away. We must start preparing you," she quickly said, pulling him away from the possible sense of her lingering fluids. "I'm pretty sure with my arrival, there soon will be a call for my name."
Ember!
The mountain shook as the voice of Torch came through. Spike felt the whole mountain shake as the sound of possibly the largest dragon in all of Equestria began making his way to the mountain. Ember all but groaned inwardly as she knew that soon the worst is to come with her father's arrival. From the largest entrance of the cave came in the great frame of Torch, his giant gaze quickly settling on Ember's before his red eyes followed to Spike. His snort alone sent Spike into hiding behind Ember, who seemed already used to her father's giant size and usual demeanor. His voice came still high in volume, but a lot softer than his usual booming voice. "So," he stated, his giant head nodding back and forth, "this is the whelp you have chosen." Ember gave a nod, using her tail to gently comfort Spike.
"It is, father."
She then slowly pushed him forward and he came out, slowly and sheepishly giving a small wave to the former Dragon Lord. In truth, Spike has never wanted so hard to soil himself up with being this close to Torch. He thought he was intimidating before, but the fact that he was just a fraction of an inch compared to him. It was honestly a wonder that he was ever the size of Ember, let alone having her size that she was now. Torch seemed way unimpressed, and even though he listens to his daughter, he would regularly speak his disinterest in his daughter's choices. "And you're telling me that he helped you acquire the Bloodstone Scepter, despite his size?" It wasn't a question, much less. It was more a statement that seemed disbelieving or condescending, her father's inquire towards the little dragon before her. He was barely the dirt in his claw, and yet he was the only one not to save her from the trials, but also managed to gain the scepter, with her help.
"Yes, father, and it was his size that he used his advantage to get through the environments and managed to retrieve it. Not only that, but his stature and quick thinking allowed us to get the scepter before other dragons did."
"That includes the bumbling dragon Garble?" Both tiny dragons gave each other a look before nodding, though it was Spike whom spoke, albeit a bit meekly.
"Yes, sir, though Garble kept trying to sabotage and even trying to get rid of us, and me and Ember fought him off so he didn't get hold of the scepter."
"You did?" he asked, sounding a little bit growled. Spike guessed that he didn't like Garble either. That excuse of a dragon would have been for the front of an ideal dragon lord, if not for his lack of proper intellectual understanding of ruling. Perhaps, personally, I prayed that he was never to reach the stone.
"Then why did you allow him to participate in the Gauntlet of Fire?"
Spike spoke before he realized that he'd just questioned the giant dragon. A meep left his mouth, one that would have made Fluttershy approve, as the giant eyes focused on him. "When a Dragon Lord's time has come to pass on to the scepter, he must allow any and all dragons to participate, regardless of personal feelings." He paused and looked at both, with a satisfying grin appearing on his large head. "Still, I am pleased to know that at least he didn't win." He paused, then seemed to brighten his mood a bit. "More so than you," he said, using his large snout to point at Spike. "Went out of your way to make sure that he didn't win, and you saved my daughter more than one time. Something that other dragons would have not cared for, nor slowed down to help their fellow dragon." He then bowed his giant head. Most of it was really touching the floor, so he only declined a bit, closing his eyes. "For that, well, you have my ever gratitude for my daughter's continued existence." Pride swelled in Spike's chest, and he felt a bit better towards Torch, now that he knew that he had a softer side. Ember looked just as pleased as her father's appraise towards her consort.
It's Spike, father.
She gave a hearty grin.
Spike is his name.
The former Dragon Lord opened both eyes and landed them on his daughter. He then got a large rumbling to shake part of the cave, which Spike saw that he was giggling. Indeed, my daughter, though a queer name he has.
Hey!
He gave a small shout towards Torch.
It might not be something as great as Torch, but it's still my name. A name I carry with pride.
The large dragon gave him a look, but this time, Spike didn't wilts or shy towards the larger dragon. This seemed to bring a large smile towards him. And he has spunk! Ha! He bellowed, once more before shaking the cave. This time, Spike didn't really get fearful of the large dragon and felt like he could deal with the larger dragon's humongous personality. Ember seemed to be used to it. With the somewhat odd beginning that they had started off with, Spike felt more relaxed at Torch's attitude towards him. It still didn't really ease him knowing that he would be judged by him and other dragons during the trials. Speaking of...
Mr. Torch, sir?
The large dragon cocked his head. It's just Torch. Well, Spike. No need for that pony formality you've been raised with. Speaking of, how did it take with your family? Friends? With your absence from them? Sadness overtook him, and Ember gave a small glare to her father. However, it seemed that the larger dragon was more understanding with it than before. Never let it be told that friends and family make you weak, young Spike. The young dragon picked up his head, seeing the former Dragon Lord in a new light. The larger dragon was speaking from experience, and it was never before revealed to other dragons, minus his own daughter. You leaving them for my daughter shows how committed you are to this. I wish the scepter allowed Ember an extended time to leave in her absence, but it must remain in the burning grounds, and it must be within her grasp for a certain period of time. Spike gave a small nod, though not fully understanding the reasoning. Of course, I wanted to help out Ember in this because she told me that there was little choice. If not for me, then it would have been another dragon, and I didn't want her to be miserable with some excuse of a drake not treating her right. He missed that quick glance from father to daughter, mostly because his large eyes had a big view of them, but the unease was passed between the two. Torch saw that Ember went with a lie to bring him here, and Ember gave a look of uneasiness. Thankfully, the larger dragon went with it and actually seemed to like it. The fact that you went away from just to ensure my daughter's happiness means more to me than you know. Torch seemed to be more pleased at this, and it showed. Spike felt the appreciation that rolled off the tongue of the larger dragon. Not many, if any, dragons nowadays take that initiative with their mates. Spike blushed at that name, and he twiddled with his claw digits.
Sorry, Torch, we're not mates yet. Well, not yet. Ember and I are just, consorts.
This time he saw the large eyes move towards Ember, whom held a blush of her own, but it was both embarrassment and somewhat shameful at not fully explaining it to her father. However, Torch seemed to still be content with the answer. Regardless of how you wish to proceed it, the fact that you still want to help my daughter is more generosity and kindness than most dragons are known for. Spike nodded and gave a warmth of a smile to Ember, whom returned it.
That is what I learned from my pony friends and family. Spread the magic of friendship through generosity, kindness, honesty, loyalty, and laughter. You bring it all together and it makes it all complete, kind of like magic. The silence that followed echoed loudly, and Spike didn't know if it was just confusion, in which was something he said that the larger dragon didn't really understand, or was that he was contemplating on what he just shared with. He, however, did not really expect the response. He laughed out loud, causing the whole mountain to vibrate with his body. It shook so wildly that both the smaller dragons feared that the cave would be in pieces of rocks falling from the ceiling came up. The lava and water pools shook, the hordes and scrolls from the room fell, and outside, other dragons watched as the former Dragon Lord flailed his body to and fro, his body shaking with laughter. Ember quickly picked up Spike and shoved him under her father's giant head to get away from the falling rocks that threatened to land on them. Father!
Ember yelled out.
You're gonna bring down the mountain on top of us!
The larger dragon managed to turn his boisterous laughter into somewhat controlled giggles. If giggles were still semi-quakes that rumbled and still threatened the foundations of the mountains. Once he managed to settle himself, both dragons came from underneath the dragon's larger jaw. He took in a large inhale before releasing it, filling the cave with a strong gust of wind and a large smell of sulfur and ash. Spike didn't know what was funny, but now his poor face carried the look of embarrassment and awkwardness. He was rubbing his tail, feeling that he just made himself look like a fool or an idiot, and that Torch most likely felt disgrace towards his daughter's decisions. Ember was glaring at him, clearly peeved at her father's outburst of laughter that clearly made Spike really feel stupid. However, before she could yell at her larger father, he spoke in volume. Those ponies do have the funniest and most amazing and amusing lessons that I've ever heard. His voice was high, but it carried a merrier attitude that seemed to confuse both dragons. Clearly, Torch's attitude toward Spike seemed to be spontaneous at each new info that was brought on before him. They have taught you lessons that other dragons wouldn't care for, nor bother to discover on their own, yet in your short lifetime, you have learned those lessons from them, in which case made you save my daughter, work alongside her, stick with her until the end, giving her the unlimited power to dragonkind. His giant eyes that burned of a wild fire cast their orbs back towards Spike. I can truly not think of a kind-hearted dragon to meet my expectations for a mate, or consort for Ember in that matter, than a whelping raised by ponies. I have not met a dragon with heart such as yours in a long while. Ember was filled with an emotional joy at her father's words, and Spike seemed at all more pleased with the larger dragon's words.
Well, thank you, Lord, Torch,
Spike said a bit proudly, his mood returning back to pleased.
I don't suppose, though, now that you know what kind of dragon I am, that you might cancel the trials I have to pass?
Torch gave a toothy grin and laughed. If only it were that simple. Well, Spike, I believe that this only shows that you're willing to endure the trials even more. Spike's mood dropped as he wilted a bit. Torch held his grin while Ember patted him. Fear not, your heart is actually part of the test. For one, I believe that you can successfully pass this trial, if the gauntlet was anything to show of it. Looking up, he drew the question.
What if I fail the trials?
The larger dragon gave it a thought before his eyes settled into a gentle ease towards the small dragon. I believe that you won't. However, if you do fail, I know my Ember will still keep you as her mate. My apologies, consort, regardless of the circumstances. The true trials that are against you are more or less what makes you a dragon and how you fill the role next to Ember in the future as a worthy co-ruler. A trustworthy advisor, an elder, or just a general consort with no influence to Ember in the future. Spike's head tilted at that, and giving a questioning look to Ember, she just gave a small shrug.
You are going to be seen as some Drake serious, trustworthy, leader-wise, or just some Drake whom just wants to be with me,
Came her simple response, though he nodded in understanding. Her words, he paused and turned to Torch.
Future?
He asked.
What about the future?
This got him to finally find the uneasy glances between father and daughter, seeing the fear rush to Ember.
What future?
He re-asked again.
Are you talking about the one how I'll be Ember's consort, or my role here?
Ember tried to speak, but it was Torch that got out the words before her. Your future here, young Spike, is of your own. You have a family that you will love, but you must also understand that, as Ember's consort, you may be here for a while in which you must secure how the other dragons will see you.
But Ember said that I would only be here for...
Then he trailed off and looked towards Ember, whom was looking away shamefully.
Ember?
His voice was full of worry and fear, not sure what was happening.
Is he right?
Tell him now, before it's too late or risk losing it all, was the response from Torch. Spike didn't look at him, rather his focus was on Ember, whom was physically struggling with herself and holding herself from breaking down. She managed to inhale a shaky breath before she responded.
I lied to you, Spike.
She paused, inhaling deeply, trying to steady herself before placing herself directly in front. Her eyes betrayed sadness and fear, but worst of all, betrayed in self-hatred.
I lied to you about all of this. I told you what I needed you to hear is to ease you into the truth later on.
A slow and breaking virtue began making its way into his emotions, but fear and small bits of anger were a more visual aspect on his features.
And what's the truth?
He dared ask, feeling slowly showing as his heart was beating at an accelerated rate. She closed her eyes, feeling tears break through her lids before she opened them and stared at the dragon before her.
You cannot go back later on to your friends or family. You must remain at my side until the Bloodstone Scepter is successfully bonded with you and me. Once that is done, we must stay together for the rest of our lives.